Hello and welcome to the Elamos and Aaron moment. My name is Aaron Spears.
And I'm Brad Hathcock.
Very interesting there. We usually get a little countdown, and that time we didn't get it.
I did actually get a countdown.
Oh,
That's why I was wondering why you started because I did get a countdown.
well, maybe my audio will be cut off then. Oh
And
well.
worse things have happened, like my entire audio track not showing up for an entire podcast.
Hey, I
So.
still put it out. It only had like 40 cuts. Um, this is that little thing I was telling you about. We were talking about. The words are
Yeah.
backwards, but it's called the Playdate. It's a little handheld console, and it's got a little crank on it, and it's got like regular games on it too, but it's also got like games based around the crank. And I pre-ordered this around 2.5 or maybe over 2.5 years ago, and then it just came in the mail today. Because what happened basically is like they got it all manufactured, and this is all happening during COVID, so shit was kind of wild. And then they finally got all the units in, and then they realized that the battery life wasn't what they had requested from the company. So they could have either done put it out as is or replace the battery. They chose to do right by the consumer, replace the battery, and then it took another like year and a half for them to start getting those units back. And then I was part of Group Four, so these things started shipping almost a year ago, and they just now got around to me.
So is this a real console? Like, is it
Yeah,
is it
man.
an old console? No, I mean
No,
like,
it's brand new, actually.
who's it made by?
The company's called Playdate.
And what kind of games are on there? I imagine something with fishing based around the crank.
I suppose there is a fishing game. I actually it's a subscription, but it's a free subscription, and then they basically upload games to their marketplace, and then you can download and play them. And the kinds of games that are available are anything from like a regular platformer, like a left to right jumping thing, to like maybe trivia puzzle games, to games that actually utilize the crank, and it's all proprietary, based on the console itself, and also visually, it's kind of like the graphics on the display are kind of like an Etch a Sketch, but like a really HD Etch a Sketch. It's very interesting.
Well, so I would say, like the original Game Boy, like the big green blocky Game Boy,
Hmm.
it had similar graphics that were like an Etch a Sketch kind of, like it was super pixelated into certain areas and whatnot. But I assume something more updated than that, right?
Yeah, it's more like monochromatic, but like super high definition monochromatic display like graphics. So,
Can we get an unboxing?
do you want to do an unboxing on the
Yeah,
podcast? I mean, for
yeah.
listeners who don't know, I think I'm probably describing it correctly.
Well, they can fuck off because watch the video, please, on Rumble and on YouTube where we're being algorithmed out. So please try and look at
I
the
I
YouTube
have watched
videos.
yeah, I have watched the YouTube video before. Mostly because I wanted to know how my audio was, and turns out that I was making a lot of weird noises, and it drove me crazy. I was like, okay, I need to sort of stop doing that. So it was helpful for that reason.
So when I export everything out through this platform, I can eliminate the background noise and stuff, and I usually check that off when I do that. But okay, here we go. It says
All
have
right,
fun. That's it. That little.
this little thing. So it's yellow. It's very tiny, so it's about the size of the palm of my hand. And then
Did you have color choices?
nope, this is the color it is. So then you can pull out your little crank.
Oh, that's gonna break. That looks flimsy.
So they play tested this quite a bit, and it's sturdy. It's in there pretty good, actually.
Yeah, but how thick is like the pin that's in it to hold that in? I don't know, man. That looks
I don't
flimsy.
know. Seems like it'd be fine.
I guess.
Yeah,
How hard are you cranking it?
pretty. I'm cranking it pretty good here for the listener. I'm cranking it pretty good here. And then I guess I have to charge it. So, oh nope, there it
You
goes.
should be able to charge it by cranking it.
Yeah, time to crank it. Oh yeah.
Let's see. Turn it around. Let's
Can
see
you
the
hear?
graphics. Did you just buy a Tamagotchi? I'm pretty sure you just bought a Tamagotchi.
Oh, you're not being generous enough. Okay. Let's see.
Looks
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. I guess I gotta find a way to crank the brightness up. Oh, it'd be cool if you just
With the
used
crank.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll have to spend some time with it to learn how it works.
So many uses for that crank, and we haven't seen any of them yet.
I'll report back next week once I've delved into this modern technology.
He's gonna crank one out, everyone.
Mm.
For all of us.
All right. So, that was an unboxing of a video game console I waited 2.5 years to get. Pardon me.
Are you more or less enthused about it now that you've exposed yourself to the world?
I think this thing's freaking awesome, so I'm still excited. Yeah, I'm still excited about this. But I love
It
video
shows.
games. Like, I can't wait to play, because it's games that are only going to work with a crank, so this is the only way to play it, is
Wait, right, but what works with a crank?
the
You have to,
games
like,
that they made for it.
Put bolts in Frankenstein's neck?
I hope
cranking them in
so.
there.
Great idea. Okay,
Sorry,
Enough of-
Frankenstein's monster's neck. For the record, Frankenstein is not the monster, and Frankenstein himself did not have bolts in his neck.
you don't even need to read the book
Just
to
for
know that.
posterity purposes.
Yeah. Okay, enough of that bullshit. Let's get on to the real meat of the matter. We're not actually leaving the video game world here for what we're going to talk about today. So Microsoft wanted to acquire Activision Blizzard, and they started this process like last summer. And in order to do that, they have to get approval from all these agencies around the world. I believe they've got approval from everything except for the UK up to this point.
The
So like
UK's
even Japan,
pretty like stringent about this kind of shit. Like
They are.
They really don't. To be honest, the U.S. does a really shit job of things like this, with like our antitrust laws and stuff like that.
Sure.
They're really not strong at all. I actually believe that the U.S. government, one shouldn't exist, but if they're going to, need to actually do stuff like this, because the centralization of power from these two large companies. I mean, we all know Microsoft has Xbox and has been in games for a long time. So to purchase one of the largest game companies with, let's face it, Call of Duty being one of the largest game titles in the world, you know, I think it makes sense to go after them for the antitrust shit and try to ultimately stop a lion's share of the gaming industry ending up in Microsoft's hands.
So by the end of this, you may feel differently, but we'll see. So the UK steps in, they do their regulatory oversight, and they got hung up on cloud gaming, which is a very, very strange thing to get hung up on. So for them, they were like, well, Microsoft has cloud gaming, and I think Sony doesn't, and that was like the issue for them. They were like, that's what the UK didn't like, which made
So
zero
Sony
sense.
should start doing cloud gaming.
Yeah, so they didn't have an issue with anything else. So it was a very bizarre thing when that came out. And what we kind of learned from that was that the people who are making these decisions don't really know a lot about the game industry.
Oh no, that's also a big problem amongst even just enforcing the U.S. antitrust laws. They don't understand these industries. Like, they don't work in these industries for the most part. Or the people that sit on the committee don't work in the industry at all or have never. So they end up going out and basically probably talking to lobbyists, and then the lobbyists are like, yeah, that's good or not good.
So when they said cloud gaming, it was like everybody was kind of like, everybody who follows this shit or is into games is like, what? Like, why that? Because that obviously, I think it was they were afraid that Microsoft would like stifle competition with Google, which also does it. So anyway, that came out, and that was like okay, maybe this won't happen after all. So then it comes to the FTC, and Biden's person at the FTC, Lena Khan, is basically anytime there's going to be a merger and the FTC is going to be involved, they're going to try to block it, right? So this is where like I have a problem with them getting involved, is that she and people like her, the people who are like, they're in these positions of power, they are not elected, and they have an agenda, and the agenda is block everything big no matter what.
Sure.
So like they weren't even looking at it based on the merits. They were just going to block it because they were going to block it. So they go in front of the court, and this all happened like last week, a couple weeks ago. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start reading from some of the details, and you can jump in and talk if you want about, or if you have any questions. So the main crux of it, you already touched on it, was that Activision Blizzard has this one thing, and that's Call of Duty. And the entire sort of thing was like hinging off of that. So when the FTC came in, that's what they were kind of focused on. So it wasn't about the business. So we had Jim Ryan, who's the CEO of Sony, come on the stand first, and he says, it is not an exclusivity play at all, Ryan said. They're thinking bigger than that, and they have the cash to make moves like this. Obviously, he's referring to Microsoft. And what was interesting about this was that the FTC lawyer was sort of arguing not for what was better for the consumer, but what was better for Sony. So they weren't able to, basically, they weren't able to make the case very well that Microsoft buys Activision. How is that going to hurt the consumer? And instead it was, it's going to hurt Sony. So Sony gets on. Go ahead.
So it's like you were saying, if they were focusing on the cloud gaming, right? Like that's actually just Sony's fault for not developing anything around cloud gaming. Where I can understand the issue kind of comes from the Microsoft end is they already have cloud everything built into their structure, so it's easy just to move the cloud gaming into that structure already. So it's like they're getting an extra jump on it because Sony would have to build out that technology, but that's Sony's problem. Like that's not the problem of the consumer at all.
Yeah, and this was a really telling court case, because what in the process of revealing all this information, they found out a lot. They had to reveal a lot of stuff they didn't want to reveal. So like one of the things that came out of it was that Microsoft tried to buy Sega a few years ago. I'm sure Microsoft's probably tried to buy everything at some point.
Probably
behind the scenes. Yeah. So not that was surprising, but that was something you wouldn't have known without this court case. So what was really shocking was that in the course of all this coming out, there was a lot of emails. And Jim Ryan, the CEO of Sony, of PlayStation rather, he came out and said he was not actually concerned about this acquisition when it was first announced. And so immediately the FTC and Sony were on the wrong foot, because they were like, we don't care if they get this, we're still going to get Call of Duty or whatever. So that was an interesting thing that came out, and I think that really undermined the entire rest of the case, because every single day it was like, yeah, but you didn't really care.
And that's that's like the big hang up for Europe, basically, is that like Call of Duty wouldn't be on the PlayStation, it seemed. And then it came out that they kind of offered like 10 years worth of phasing that out. So you better figure something out by year 10. But I imagine they would extend that. I mean, if Microsoft owns that title, the sales alone, even if they bought it for PlayStation, they still have the title. Like,
right.
It's better for you if more people pick that game up, regardless. Because I don't know the pay structure, like how Sony has to pay for that property or whatever, but I would imagine there's some kind of like percentage of sales kickback that goes to Activision or something. You know what I mean? Like that they have to pay.
Yeah, it's like a licensing fee. So we know that the that Call of Duty is the hang up for everything. So Phil Spencer's the head of Microsoft of Xbox, and he got on the stand, and that's where I think things get just super duper interesting, because and it's crazy. So console wars, right, is a term that goes back to the Sega versus Nintendo in the 90s. When Sega came out with that advertisement that said Sega does what Nintendo don't, and that was sort of
I was
the start.
really young then. I wouldn't remember that.
Yeah, it was that was the start of the console wars. And Nintendo would eventually go. Nintendo did other things like there was a Donkey Kong Country. There's a scene or a part of the game where you're on a let's say like a tournament stand. Like you came in third place, first place, second place, third place, right? Like the little podium, and then like Sonic's shoes are off to the side in the corner. So like Nintendo was taking shots at Sega too. It was like a back and forth thing, and
I do get the console wars because, like, obviously when like the GameCube came out, then so did the Sega Dreamcast.
Yeah,
Now,
and they've
both
in the
were
PlayStation
failures in their own right. In my opinion, I don't know a lot of people who had either a GameCube or a Dreamcast. I know people who had them, sure, but not a ton. I will say that
I
because
did have
think
them
everybody
both.
moved to PlayStation, like you kind of had said. This
Right.
PlayStation 1 came out.
Yeah, and the original Xbox console came out too at the same time. It was like 2001. So like console wars has been in the internet forum, Reddit, whatever jargon for decades at this point. I'm familiar with it, but it was very interesting because for the first time in like probably ever in like law, somebody in a courtroom said out loud, Microsoft said Xbox has lost the console wars, and its rivals are positioned to continue to dominate, including by leveraging exclusive content. That's Microsoft saying that. So it's pretty
How?
wild.
So Microsoft admitted to losing the console wars?
They
How?
did. Well, so they have 16% share of console sales in 2021 when you count the Switch, and 21% of the console install base. What they're saying is, and this is true, Microsoft currently is in third place behind Sony and Nintendo. So if you count this generation, yes, they did lose it. Now, one other thing that was really interesting was that they actually, if you ever think back, you go the Xbox 360 was like the most popular console of that generation. In my mind, that's right. It was like, oh, the PS3 was more expensive, and the 360 just had like all kinds of great stuff on it. Well, I didn't realize this. The PlayStation 3 actually outsold the Xbox 360. Believe it or not.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Even though PlayStation 2 had internet. Like,
yeah.
so they, a lot of people don't realize that you could put internet on your PlayStation.
Yeah. So Sony's outsold Microsoft on that generation. PlayStation 4 versus Xbox One, Sony outsells Microsoft, and now PlayStation 5 outsells the Xbox Series X. So
I think
they're not
Xbox
wrong.
fucked with their menus maybe too much, and I
Yeah,
think maybe they leaned too heavily into maybe certain aspects of things that people don't like about the Xbox operating system anymore.
There are a myriad of reasons why the Xbox One was a failure. First thing was that it came with a Kinect, so that was a pack-in. That was a business mistake. There was the E3 where they announced that they were going to have always online, and Sony came out the next day at their E3 conference and said, or maybe it was later that day, they said, no, you don't have to be online to play our games. Right? These were like huge missteps by Microsoft during that time. And so I think that all soured them, and the menus were also terrible. Yes,
the 360 was amazing. See, now we're kind of into the era where I started playing more video games because
sure.
Once I started getting into like sports, I kind of stopped playing video games basically until like college, and Gears of War came out, and I started playing that, and that pretty much got me hooked into playing video games. So then I started playing that, but I started on an Xbox, so like Xbox and then Xbox 360, and then I did switch to PlayStation, and just recently switched back to Xbox. I got the Series X. I didn't care which one I got honestly. Like, I kind of went with whatever was available first. Um, and I'm actually pretty happy with my decision. I can't complain. I've always kind of liked Xbox maybe a little bit more than PlayStation, but
I have too. So we get into this day two, and Phil Spencer, CEO of Microsoft Gaming, says, "As the console wars is a social construct with the community, I would never want to count our community out. They're big fans. If you look at our market share in the console space over the last 20 years, we're in third place." Very interesting thing to say out loud. Um, so the FTC is trying to make their case, and then this is where it kind of gets funny. FTC says this: if Microsoft is going to grow, particularly in a business like console, it can grow by taking share from its competitors. Spencer says there's no console growth in our Activision deal model. FTC says, do you have any intention of this deal helping you climb out of the number 3 spot? Spencer, in console, we do not. FTC, so that's just a write-off? Spencer, I don't understand how that's a write-off. So you can see how the FTC is like making mistakes here.
but that's a blatant lie. That's a blatant lie, okay? And it you can immediately fall back on the whole Call of Duty thing. Because sure, they'll give them 10 years. They're playing the long game. In 10 years, they will have taken that market share because people will be like, oh, there's only like 3 years left of Call of Duty. The new Xbox is coming out. I think maybe I'm just going to get a new Xbox so that I can continue to play Call of Duty once it's stopped on PlayStation. That's a long game right there. If they don't recognize that, that will likely increase their market share, I would say probably by at least 5%. I would say probably by at least 5%, maybe even
You know how
up to
I get
10% in that 10 years.
You know how I argue with you on that, or my point would be? I would be on console, no. The idea being that within 10 years, there won't be hardware, right?
Fair.
So maybe he's not lying when he says that. But the future is unpredictable in that scenario. So the FTC starts, I think, be clowning itself. At one point, Spencer hit back to correct the FTC lawyer on how acquisitions work. The FTC says to him, "Now you have $70 billion upfront payment that you're making for Activision, right?" Spencer comes back and says, "No. When you acquire something, it's not a payment. It's like when you buy a house. You're buying an asset that has value, so it's really a transfer of cash into an asset called Activision that you believe retains value that you acquired. So to try and characterize the $70 billion as somehow spent is incorrect. Financially, it's really moving $70 billion in cash into an asset, which is a game publisher that to us is actually worth more than $70 billion. So it is not
just
spent."
said money isn't real.
Well, anyway, so that was an interesting thing. So there were other parties involved with this acquisition. Nvidia and Google both also wanted to block. They joined Sony basically to say they wanted to block it as well.
Of course.
There's no reason for them not to. They're competitors, whether they're competing in that market or not.
Well, as a whole, it grows like the market share and increases the stock price for Microsoft. So they may not be a direct competitor as far as like gaming or consoles go, but let's also be real here. They have good developers typically at Activision making games. I know Call of Duty has its problems, understood, but that does not stop fucking people from playing it. And Microsoft may not have like the bandwidth to put together some of these better games, or maybe Activision already has some kind of technology like an Unreal Engine or something that Microsoft doesn't already have that they can plug into for their Microsoft-based games, like computer games, things like that. You know, Activision isn't they're very, very well known for making computer games too, right? We have Diablo,
Yes, absolutely.
StarCraft,
World of Warcraft.
like Warcraft before that. Like they've been in the game, like the computer game industry, a while too. So it's actually a very good purchase from Microsoft's standpoint, just for the development expertise and everything else. It would definitely increase their market share. I get where Google and Nvidia are, well, Nvidia is kind of a weird one.
Well, they have a cloud gaming service,
Do they? Okay.
so they compete directly with Microsoft, but so does Steam, right? Like it's that's where it gets complicated. The cloud gaming is almost not even worth having a discussion over because it doesn't exist yet. Kind of. I mean, it's like a thing, but it's not. Anyway, so the judge here, by the way, asks very good questions because she admits openly, I don't know everything about the video game industry. So help me understand the case you're trying to make. So anyway, the judge says, okay, you got the Xbox Series S. The pricing is closer to the Switch. Does it compete with the Switch? This character, Dr. Lee, says there's the Series X and the PlayStation 5, and the Series S is still in the market. If you think about a price increase on the X, the customers who buy the X are more likely to switch to the PS5 or the Switch. So this decides the market definition, value, whatever, blah, blah. The point they're trying to make here was the FTC was trying to say that Microsoft isn't competing directly with Nintendo. They're only competing directly with Sony. Again, trying to help. They're trying to justify it for Sony in their point. They're not trying to justify it for the consumer. The truth is, all three of these consoles do compete with one another, whether or not the technology is the same. So a game that runs really well on the X and the PS5 doesn't run well on the Switch. We know this. But the Switch is still a competitor in that space. And that was where I think the FTC fucked up. Because they tried to make it sound like Nintendo wasn't a player. When Nintendo is a huge player. Probably the biggest player. I mean, going forward, right? So there were a couple other things that I found that made me kind of not... I didn't worry about it, Microsoft sucking up IP in this way, because if you take Call of Duty out of the equation, they're buying things like Spyro the Dragon or Tony Hawk's Pro Skater or World of Warcraft. Like, these are not properties that are like very well known anymore, or they're older properties. It's just IP that exists out in the ether. And I...
Right, but that most people played on their PlayStation. Like, I remember playing Spyro the Dragon. That was on PlayStation 1.
Yeah, but it wasn't a PlayStation owned thing. It was an Activision owned thing.
Right.
Anyway, what I wanted to say was that, PlayStation 5 has exclusives, and those exclusives include Spider-Man, Wolverine, God of War, Uncharted.
They love to make
Last of
stupid
Us.
fucking hack and slash games.
They make single player focused games. That's their business strategy. They are the console leader right now.
That's the one that hurts for me, is The Last of Us. Being a Sony only, since I went and got an Xbox, is not being able to play the remaster. I mean, I have a PlayStation 4, but what's really the point,
Yeah, I have those games. I have all those games I just listed. I'm not particularly... Look, Sony is doing its own thing, right? It's making these single player games, and they sell massively. They really do. Microsoft doesn't have that going for them, and that's the point that they were trying to make, was that everybody said, oh, it's Microsoft, they're this huge thing, but when it comes to their Xbox platform, they don't have like major games. In fact, when they bought Bethesda, the whole reason why they put Starfield as an exclusive on the Xbox was because before they bought Bethesda, Sony had actually made deals with Bethesda to keep games like Deathloop off of the Xbox. So like Sony had been doing this the whole time. Sony's been paying companies not to put their games on Xbox or getting exclusivity for, like, let's say Final Fantasy 16 came out like 2 weeks ago. It's not going to come out on Xbox for at least a year. That's the deal they made. So like Sony plays kind of dirty with this stuff too. So, okay.
It's so stupid, though, because you could just make more money by licensing the fucking game to the other company. Like, let them fucking play on the Xbox. Who gives a fuck? As long as if your game is still raking in cash for you, just let it go. Like, you're actually hurting your bottom line, because I know I said people will buy consoles for Call of Duty. I do think that that's true. Or, like you said, it may not even be a console in 10 years. It may just be whatever, some cloud gaming thing. Um, but now when it comes to cloud gaming, like if that's the direction we're heading, they're not looking to the future in that regard and saying, oh, well, we need to keep up these lines of communication and license our games because we're not going to have consoles in the future. It's probably just going to be a subscription service online to Sony or Xbox. Like, I don't know. Like, what does that look like? What do you think that looks like in the future for cloud gaming?
Well, that's the dilemma that's what Microsoft's trying to figure out right now. I mean, they have their technology in many different places, so they've built up a cloud gaming. In these court hearings, they've admitted it's profitable, but not no it barely, like barely. And they don't have the games. They're not making money off of games. They're not making money off of console sales because most companies take a loss on consoles unless you're like Nintendo, because they just use older tech, and so the money's coming from subscriptions. It's coming from Game Pass, and I think they know that they're ready for that. So that's their future. I guarantee you. Sony doesn't have that future. I don't know what Sony's long-term strategy is for their PlayStation platform, because right now, they just, even though they're the platform leader, they don't innovate in that way. They innovate in the game space. They innovate with the cinematic Spider-Man 2 and these like epic single-player whatevers.
Death
That's where
Stranding.
Death Stranding. So
That's the other one that hurts. That was a good game.
Death Stranding is available on Game Pass on PC. Did you know that?
I did not.
Interesting, huh? Anyway, so ultimately, where I came down on this was that I think, first of all, what is the role of the federal government in matters like this? Is it up to the FTC to step in and say Microsoft cannot buy Activision Blizzard? And is it because of the dollar amount? Is it because it's 70 billion, or is it because of the intellectual property?
So, for the federal government, as it currently stands, I would say they'll probably lose out on this one. They'll they'll have to rule it in the other way and let the merger go through. There's no known way right now, to your point, that we can say this hurts consumers, and that should be like number one priority, is how does this affect consumers. It ultimately doesn't, because Activision Blizzard games will still be available on other platforms, so that doesn't really affect them. um, Microsoft owning Activision Blizzard, does that change the pricing of video games, or is that going to make the video game cost skyrocket? Not really.
I don't think so. No.
So I don't see that happening. If anything, there's probably better for the consumer because there'll be more money behind Activision Blizzard. Um, Microsoft already has high standards and stuff like that, so they actually could probably push out a better product by being owned by a larger corporation. So,
And the whole obviously the tipping point here is Call of Duty as a brand, and they just said 10 years and we'll put it on Nintendo's console as well, which they certainly didn't have to do that. I mean, to me that is above and beyond, but legally it makes sense to make the argument. Anyway, the judge came back and ruled in Microsoft's favor and said, we'll let the deal go through. She was not convinced that the FTC and Biden's Lena Khan, which by the way, she's also made a lot of failures lately. She's actually not. She's actually struggling to over-regulate and control big tech. She's not making a good enough case for any of it. So this wasn't really a surprise, I guess. But the judge said, yeah, well, I'll let it go through. And the FTC appealed. Now, the FTC appealing that decision is very frustrating to me because the judge is saying, you didn't do a good enough job of making this about the consumer. And then the FTC's like, oh, you can't let it go through. You still can't let it go through. Tomorrow, Saturday, the 15th, the appeals court, the Ninth Circuit will, I think, make that determination. More than likely, usually circuit judges will side with the judge that made the ruling, it would be unusual for the circuit court to intervene. So right now it's leaning towards sort of like, yeah, it's probably going to happen. So I just thought it was interesting because we have somebody in the federal government who isn't elected, and they're getting involved in this, and they're not actually making the case for the consumer. And I thought that was really interesting.
Well, we all know that the federal government doesn't really care about the consumer in the first place.
They don't.
So it doesn't
Luckily,
really matter.
the judge did. And Microsoft did, for their part, make a good case that what they were doing wasn't going to harm the consumer. And I think it really just comes down to who had the better lawyers. The FTC and Sony, or Microsoft. Microsoft did, you know? So I don't know.
That's why we have a court system.
They adjudicated it, yeah. So it was an interesting thing to follow. And I just wanted to, I don't know, talk about it with you. So it's been sort of interesting. If you're into video games, this was very interesting, to say the least.
I mean, I find that situation interesting for a multitude of reasons. One, I do like video games, maybe clearly not as much as you do. I do typically like Microsoft products. I have no problem with it. I really don't have a problem with this merger, but I'm also interested in it and hope it gets denied, because I know a certain somebody who stands to make some money off of this deal, and I don't want to see that happen.
So that certain person already made their money. Young Bradley here is referring to me. I owned Activision Blizzard stock. I sold it when the UK ruling came out. So I made $1,000 off of it. I could have probably stood to make a lot more if I would have waited, but I didn't think it was going to happen. So
you got to play the risky long game.
No, basically what I'm telling you is you can wish for this to go through now. I'm not financially involved anymore.
Oh, I actually don't give a shit if this goes through or not. It has virtually no bearing on my life as an individual. It doesn't matter.
I want it for two reasons. One, I don't think Activision is doing very well with its own IP right now. I think they could be doing more. Like,
you mean Call of Duty? Because no.
Everything but, yeah. I mean, like, the Crash Bandicoots of the world. I mean, I want to see... Activision has, like, been around longer than, like, any other company, and they have so much IP, and I just would like them to go back and port that stuff that's not available to us right now. And I think Microsoft could help them go back into the catalog and put stuff on Game Pass. And the other thing is Game Pass. That was my number 2. So, like, go get the IP and then put it onto Game Pass so that me, as a consumer, as a gamer, can finally access it.
So. That might happen. You never know. I mean, you have to see how this merger goes through, but that's a great argument for Microsoft buying Activision, right? It's kind of like getting to recycle some IPs and update them, modernize them, and ultimately make money, because that's what they're going for.
Yeah, and I don't think Activision has been run particularly well the past 10 years. Bad business practices, lots of sexual assault type cases brought against them. And the company's been around since the early 80s. I mean, I just think there's so much there that there's so much potential. And I don't think that potential is going to come out with an independent Activision, because they're focused on selling video games, and Microsoft is focused on getting content onto Game Pass to keep the subscription service alive. So they're just two very different business models. One of them does involve putting games on the service. The other one is just how much Call of Duty can we pump out every year. So so anything else happened in the news that you want to talk about? They couldn't find that cocaine person?
No, they couldn't.
You know what?
The Secret Service shut that down.
You could upload classified documents to a private Discord server, and the media will have a helicopter over your house showing you on your patio in 32 minutes, but they cannot find who put a bag of cocaine in the White House. You know what that tells me? A, it's probably Hunter Biden's cocaine, because that's why they didn't want to do it. And B, that the Secret Service is so incompetent that they can't actually figure any of this shit out then, and C, you could basically get any white powder substance into the White House and get away with it, apparently, right?
Yeah, so the Secret Service is supposed to be like adept at handling these kinds of things, but apparently they're not. They clearly just shut this whole thing down. The FBI in this instance, it's just really showing that they are a fucking propaganda arm for this administration, 100%. The whole DOJ is just kind of like refusing to go after these situations. I see a lot about this whole Burisma and, the $10 million and shit that the Bidens allegedly took for basically pay to play shit. We're seeing a lot of things come out, and then everyone's like, oh, well, these whistleblowers are full of shit. And it just seems like we keep going further and further down this road, right? Like, it was all this stuff comes out, and then the cocaine, and like it's just like cover up after cover up after cover up after cover up, and they just don't even care to hide it anymore.
And the left was a very pro whistleblower, when it was like an oil company or something. Yeah, it was like, oh, we gotta protect the whistleblower, but Barack Obama was very anti whistleblower. He cracked down on whistleblowers and journalists.
And he
I think
said
we forget
that he campaigned that he would not do that. And then he removed that from his campaign website when it was looking good for him to get the nomination. He removed all of that. And then he proceeded to go after, what's his face?
Julian Assange?
Yeah, Julian Assange.
Snowden.
Everybody. And
yeah.
Trump said the same thing, like whistleblowers, this, that, and he did the same thing. He actually had like a plan to kill Julian Assange. Like, that's how fucking ridiculous this is getting. And anybody that's actually looked at some of the WikiLeaks stuff, it's all like really legit. I mean, that's why he's in prison right now, because it's all really legit.
It's not really prison. It's more like safe house or something.
Well, he's locked in an embassy, basically.
So this is on the heels of that leaked Dobbs decision last year, where Chief Justice Roberts is like, we tried to find him, couldn't figure out who it was. And the presumption there is like, oh, I guess it was probably a justice that leaked it to the media then. Like, I don't know. Whoever it was, it doesn't matter. But you're protecting somebody. And if this was an intern, if this was somebody who was taking a White House tour, which we now know wasn't probably the case, whoever this person was, they would have been thrown under the bus the very next day.
1,000%. 1,000%.
And that's how we know it was somebody important.
All of a sudden, there aren't cameras working, or not any cameras in an area where there's definitely always like a lot of cameras. It's harder to access and shit like that. This wasn't just some regular person, okay? This was somebody who works in the White House. Even if it wasn't Hunter Biden, it was somebody that worked in the White House.
That's important.
And I'm really shocked that they just ended the investigation with like no suspect, and that somebody didn't have to fucking fall on the proverbial sword for that crackhead.
And the media has done an impressive job, actually, of still asking the questions, because they've been so generous to Biden on so many things, and for them to actually just keep every day going like, hey, what's up with this? I mean, they evacuated the fucking building. They're like, they didn't even know what it was at first.
I'm pretty sure Karine Jean-Pierre was like, it's so disrespectful for you to ask me that question about like the Hunter Biden cocaine. It's like, no, the fuck it's not. This is legitimate news.
You're getting paid with taxpayer money. You're like, your employment is based on taxpayer money.
I wish the media would cover the fact that if this was just a normal person, they would be in prison. But the fact that Hunter Biden's father braggingly wrote the laws that would arrest people like this. He was recorded saying that if somebody has crack cocaine the size of a quarter or larger, they will receive a minimum of 5 years in prison. The judge has no choice. They must receive a minimum sentence of 5 years. Yet Hunter Biden has skated and skated and skated. Like, if people don't realize that there are certain laws that only apply to regular people, and and not like just elites. Like there's a fucking problem with that, and the left is defending that shit.
They just are.
Like they're just defending it, but that's the truth. Is if that were you or I, we'd be in prison, and it would be longer than 5 fucking years.
And listeners, Brad is like literally quoting Joseph Robinette Biden in like 1994, saying you should go to prison for this much. And also, every week Biden will tweet. It's not Biden tweeting because Biden's non-compos mentis, but the Twitter account will say rich people need to pay their fair share, right? Not Hunter didn't have to pay taxes for many years. He's since paid that back, but it didn't apply to him.
Right, because that was one of the gotchas that they were trying to hit him on. So he's like, okay, I'll pay my back taxes. Because it was basically the IRS whistleblowers are the ones saying like, hey, like we basically were told not to go after him for this stuff. And it's like, come on, man. They dropped a fucking federal gun charge. Again, Biden, who thinks that we need stronger gun laws, lets his kids slide on a federal gun charge. Like, come on. And
we talked about three
dude,
things in 5 minutes.
There are people who are completely anti-gun defending them throwing out the federal gun charge. So it comes back to your quest for like dismantling the Second Amendment, like you fucking stupid liberals want to do, is immediately defeated by the fact that you're okay with him skating on a federal gun charge. Like, so you don't even want to enforce the laws in place, but you want common sense. You don't even fucking know what that means.
It's so bizarre how much... And the right, we could talk about the right and their... Because they've also gone off the fucking deep end. But we could talk about the left right now, and that the left now stands for everything it used to be against. The left is now pro-FBI, pro-DOJ...
Pro-war.
Pro-war... They used to hate that like a rich white guy would get off because he had better lawyers than anybody else, and that's what happened here, and they're defending it. They what else? Freedom of speech? They no longer believe in freedom of speech. They think it's bad that there's freedom of speech.
And it used to be liberals, like 100%. Now, that being said, like DeSantis and the GOP, like they also ban books. So you can't sit here and say that they also defend freedom of speech, because fucking DeSantis just banned books that he claimed were like gender affirming or whatever. It doesn't fucking matter if they're gender affirming. I'm a free speech absolutist. You should be able to say whatever the fuck you want. But you can't sit there and say that you believe in free speech and then turn around and ban books. Like you can't do that.
Let me disagree with you there. Can you go into a Barnes and Noble in Florida and buy one of those books?
I don't know. That I don't know.
I'm going to presume yes. I don't know if they banned them from schools. I'm asking you. There was a story where they moved it from like a fourth grader's shelf to a sixth grader's shelf. They just switched shelves, and that was framed by the media as banning.
That wouldn't surprise me either.
I mean, I think I'm not defending. I'm agreeing with you on the point that like we probably should be banning anything at all.
But that's like, ultimately what I'm getting at, is we should not be banning anything. Like,
I'm not saying everything needs to be in a second grader shouldn't have books on sex or whatever, and that's up to the school district. I don't care. I don't live in Florida. They probably do it here. I don't. It's just a culture war bullshit, but to go back to the left, like, I don't know what happened. I agreed with like a lot of what they believed in. They changed, not me. I'm like kind of blown away by the whole thing. And with the FBI this week and Chris Wray being in front of Congress, and he's getting questions about, why did the FBI draft that letter about like teachers or parents going to like those school board meetings, and they're being considered like domestic terrorists? Like, who wrote that? Why was that even He's like, I don't know, man. I'm just trying to make changes.
Well, it's because they seized power and they have their puppet president in there, because that's what Biden is. I mean, he's a total puppet for the Democratic Party. We all know that, but they just flipped because they can. And, now they like to blame their lack of things that they're passing on Republicans when you fucking had 2 years of a majority that you could have done something and you didn't. Like the whole codifying Roe v. Wade. They complain, oh, well, they're taking away your rights. No, they're not. You had the ability to pass that with your majority and you didn't fucking do it. But the left doesn't want to look at it that way. Like, well, we should have done this. But, Roe v. Wade, like, that just goes to show you actually need to fucking do your job and make laws.
Affirmative action, same thing. Korean Jean-Pierre very famously on this news like 2 weeks ago was like, they took away my constitutional right to affirmative action. It's like,
that's not how that works.
That's not how that works.
What people don't understand is the legislative branch interprets laws. That is literally their job. So Roe v. Wade was an interpretation. Affirmative action was an interpretation. It's not a constitutional right. It's a constitutional interpretation. That interpretation is subject to change. That's just a fact. And now that it's changing, they want to complain that it's changing. Well, you had an opportunity to write an actual fucking law, and you didn't do it. Just take the L.
It's not like the left hasn't had power. They've had more power over many more years than the Republicans have.
And huge majorities. Like,
yeah,
during the Obama administration, they could have handled abortion and everything else. They could have codified gay rights and like everything else and gay marriage. They didn't do it.
You know why? Because it wasn't popular, and they were playing politics of the time.
Right.
I mean, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton both on record saying that they didn't believe in gay marriage.
Dude, they purposely, I'm pretty sure they purposely did not write anything to codify Roe v. Wade, even though they knew that this could happen. Right? They've been saying it for a long time, ever since Trump got in office. Oh, they're gonna get rid of Roe v. Wade, all this other shit. Right? It took almost 8 years for that to happen, and now it finally happened, and they just waited and waited and waited, and they're like, oh, look at what Republicans have done to you.
Illegitimate court.
So
yeah, that's
all they're trying.
It's easy.
It's a fucking psyop from the government, basically turning around and telling you have to worry about this now because they did it. They did what we said they were going to do, because that's where it stops. People listen to that instead of going, well, you didn't fucking do your job, so eat shit. Like, we're not going to vote for you anymore. That's not the way it's going to work. It's fear mongering.
The thing it's astonishing to me, honestly. In the same way that like the right will pick somebody who cannot win a federal election, the left will continue to upend things that will eventually be used against them. And just like with this FBI thing, a Republican will be president again someday, and they will have control over the FBI, and they're going to do shit that's unpopular at the FBI because you allowed the FBI to get away with it this time.
Right. There's no foresight. It's because they want to get reelected. They're not actually there to do the right thing or do their job. They just want to get reelected. So there's no incentive really for them to do anything of merit, because they just have to do the bare minimum or point fingers and blame somebody else to get reelected.
Well, it's so easy because your opponents are people who are now addicted to losing. They like to lose. That's all they care about. It doesn't matter. The winning doesn't matter anymore. So if you have a political party that's no longer interested in winning elections, do whatever you want. There's no incentive there. None. It's pretty fascinating. It's wild.
Yeah, we live in interesting times right now for our
government. Which is a curse.
Yes.
May you live in interesting times is not a positive or good thing.
No.
Okay. Anything else happened this week that you want to talk about?
Not specifically that I want to talk about, but if you have something. The federal government took another loss this week in their SEC case against Ripple XRP moving into the crypto space here. The government lost, and the federal judge said that XRP, or Ripple, if you will, is not a security, the SEC was suing them for violating securities laws, but it has been determined that they are not a security, and there has been a 60% increase in the XRP price since that has occurred. Coinbase started relisting XRP, and the prices are starting to go up. And that's actually good for the industry as a whole. I know a lot of people are like, this is going to go away from all the crashing. No, it's not. They said the same thing about the internet, and look where we are with that. It basically is the crux of everything, and crypto's been around for over a decade. Like, it's not actually going away. It's going to change in form, sure, but this was a huge, huge deal for the industry to basically not be labeled as securities, because now the government will really struggle to regulate them as securities, which is what they wanted to do in the first place.
That's big news. That's interesting.
I think it's big news because it's the government losing, and I love that.
In our closing moments, we our superfan listener is a huge fan of Robert Downey Jr., and I think I could probably ruin that for him. Do you think I should, or do you think I should not?
I think you should.
Okay. Two things. One, I just popped up in my feed, Robert Downey Jr., Associated Press. He's on the trail for Oppenheimer. He's in Oppenheimer.
I was going to say, is he
right?
back on the smack?
No, he says he came away from Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer thinking about how important context is to understand significant moments in history. He talked to the AP about the film, the history it's rooted in, and the patriarchy.
Oh, Lord.
Now, on that, I watched one episode of Robert Downey Jr.'s car show. This superfan loves cars, right? Robert Downey Jr. made a climate car show where he takes classic cars and turns them into fucking electric vehicles. And I was so disgusted.
Is that
I
on
really
Netflix?
It is.
Of course it is.
I was so disgusted by this because he's taking art. He's taking cars, which I see as like art, and he's fucking ruining them. He's taking the engines out and he's converting them to electric. The fuck is wrong with this guy? Ugh. It made me so disgusted. I was like, I can't, because Iron Man, he's Iron Man. He's the guy who tinkers on cars, muscle cars, and now he's ruining them.
Yeah, but he also built that nuclear arc reactor to power himself, which isn't gas. So
I bet you Robert Downey Jr.
It's not like he needed to keep a fucking 5-gallon gas can on his back to fill up while he was fucking flying.
I'm willing to bet Robert Downey Jr. is on record at some point in time saying he's against nuclear energy too.
Oh, I'm willing to bet that's true.
Yeah. Also, Biden tried to lick a baby or something. That was kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just par for the course. I saw somebody on Twitter go, Biden now thinks babies are ice cream cones.
Oh, no. It's true.
Did you see how terrified that little girl was after he did that?
Dude, like,
it's beautiful.
Every kid he does that. Yeah, it's crazy, man. Also, Threads came out, which is a Twitter competitor. You and I are Twitter users. I'm not going to use this fucking thing. It's part of Instagram.
Right, but do we have to get our podcast out there? Do we have to get on Threads?
I don't think anybody's on Threads. I'm pretty sure that the traffic dropped after like 2 days.
Yeah, it got like 100 million users like almost immediately, and then it looks like it pretty much just dropped off after that.
One of my favorite people in the whole like sort of conservative writing movement, Mother Jones. The rapid ascent of Threads has forced a key question facing any potentially successful social platform. Quote, what's the far right going to do with this one? End quote. And then this guy says,
Twitter.
This guy says idiot. Probably just wait it out.
They already have Twitter. I mean,
yeah,
Twitter's the far right, isn't it? So, I mean, so Threads is actually just the liberal response to that? I don't know. Supposedly Elon Musk is going to file a lawsuit against Zuckerberg for basically he's alleging that Zuck poached some old Twitter engineers and basically built a mirrored system.
He's not wrong. He's not wrong. But
Also, they're supposed to fight, so I'm looking forward to that.
I told you Zuckerberg was kind of.
So if they're supposed to fight each other in the Colosseum in Rome, how much are we willing to pay to go? Because that's going to be an expensive ticket.
I would go with you anywhere in the world. It would be sad if we went just for that reason, just to go watch those two fucking losers
Dude, that would
fight.
be amazing.
I mean, it would
Worst
be
fight in the world, I'm sure, but they'll probably stack like a monster card. I know Dana White was like trying to get involved in this, so he might stack like a really monster UFC card around it.
Dana White, man,
he's a genius, man.
He is a genius. I agree with you.
he was just on Twitter because Israel Adesanya called out. I forget the name of this fighter, but he's white, but he's from South Africa, and Israel Adesanya was born in Africa, and he kept dropping like the N-word and stuff. And a reporter was like, "Well, how do you feel about the racial undertones from that like post-fight, argument they had in the cage?" And he goes, "What racial undertones?" And the reporter's like, "Well, he kept saying the N-word." And he was like, "Who said the N-word?" He was like, "Israel Adesanya." He's like, "Well, he's black." So he was like, he's black. He can say whatever the fuck he wants. He's like, "This is the fight game. They can talk shit to each other. I don't care." He said, "Nobody gives a fuck." Next question.
We need more of that in sports. We need more people just going, "I don't fucking care," media. Next question. We really do need that.
Oh yeah, I love that. See, there's like kind of the opposite in hockey, where they get a bad rap for being like really cookie cutter, and there are reporters that try to get people like out of their their comfort zone and get like a good interview. And they interviewed Joe Thornton once, and he started basically talking about his dick like on camera. And I think somebody scored like 6 goals or something in a game. I want to say it was something like that. And Joe Thornton comes, he goes, "Oh, he had his dick out," and was like showing his dick to everybody. And he got like lambasted for it, and he shouldn't have, because that's like funny. It's a good soundbite and everything. It's him being out of that, "Oh, well, everybody played really well tonight," that kind of bullshit that like nobody wants to hear, that you get in most sports. I think the biggest difference we got in the most recent years was like during COVID and everybody's like stance on the vaccine, because when people were like, "Yeah, I'm not getting vaccinated," that's when you start to see people become really truculent towards the media for sports. And I was totally here for that. I liked it.
Yeah, me too. And man, I hope the tide's turning, because the New York Times just reassigned all their sports writers to other positions, and they're kind of leaning on the Athletic to do all that. And ESPN just laid off a bunch of people, and including Max Kellerman, which I was like, I love that. That's a great story. If you're a 24-hour sports network like ESPN, and you spend like half of that time just talking about culture war shit, and you don't even cover sports, like, you deserve to fail. And that's what happened. And hopefully independent journalism comes back in the sports arena. I think it is. I think it is. Anyway,
what else you got?
What?
Nothing.
There's a quote from Simon Pegg here. It says, Mission Impossible star Simon Pegg says, "Tom Cruise and director Christopher McQuarrie are like Lennon and McCartney." That's a beautiful thing.
Is it? I guess if you like the Beatles.
Well, if you like McCartney, I don't like Lennon, but Beatles are pretty great. I think that's pretty much it as far as news goes. I've been playing a lot of.
I just took a count lately. So I have 87 movies on my list, and I have watched like 42 of them.
You're just a shark for content. I mean, that's all. Every time you just say like, "I'm starting this," it's like, whoa.
Next year is going to be brutal, dude. Because now that actors are on strike, 2024 is going to be pretty shitty for movies. And this was a monster fucking year, okay, for movies. Like big titles all year. Just year after, or movie after movie after movie. We're seeing huge titles. And next year is going to suck. It's really going to suck.
Yeah, it did the year after the last strike. Yeah, that was the year of that horrible Transformers Rise of the fucking whatever. We watched Beau is Afraid, both of us. We liked that movie a lot. I liked it a lot.
So when I said that quote to you from the movie, do you remember which quote it was?
No.
It was about virility.
Oh. So
that's where I got that from, because I was watching
wow.
that, and that's why I said it. It's in the context of our conversation, but
I know that the director Ari Aster is on. He's been interviewed by a few different channels. I'm gonna track down those videos on YouTube because I need to know what the fuck that movie was about.
That was a weird fucking movie, man.
That movie was wild.
It was real weird. I know you don't like the movie The Void. I don't think you were a fan of that one. I just watched a movie called Malum, which was very weird, like kind of all over the place with shit happening and like weird, dumb shit. And it was kind of like The Void. I liked The Void though, so it wasn't a bad movie. For the first, I think like 40 minutes, I was like, where the fuck is this going? But it ended up being, the ending was pretty solid. I would say the last like 35 minutes, it all starts to come together and is a little bit better. But it was like The Void, so you probably won't like it.
I'll watch it. Did you finish The Bear season 2?
I did, yeah. I finished that in like 2 days. Me and my wife watched that one. What a show. I mean, just what a great show.
Yeah, that show is really, really neat. Also not a reflection of our culture war times. It's just, it kind of just puts all that shit aside and it just focuses on these people in this moment doing this thing. And I think that's really beautiful.
We turned our super fan onto that show as well. He was not sure how to feel about it.
Well, because I endorsed it. He's skeptical of endorsements I make because I have questionable tastes, but
no,
we both got them.
I think you have artful tastes. Like you like some true art house films, which is why you liked Beau is Afraid, because that's very much an art house film, and not a lot of people like that kind of stuff. I guess I do. You do way more than I do, but I do like some of them art house films as well, and that's what that is. And I think that's why he's questioned your taste. But you also like a lot of the same movies. You like all the Mission Impossibles. You both were like on my ass about not really caring for Jeremy Renner at all, and like going back and seeing some of his movies and stuff. So, I think that's probably where that comes from. But I get it because you and I watch way more content and movies than our superfan does. But
well, the Hurt Locker Appreciation, by the way, just gonna throw that out there. Love that movie. Well, and also I've had a rough go of it when it came to my video game recommendations too. So it's been up and down for me, I'll say. But
yeah, but like the way I've been consuming movies lately, like you generally always consume video games in a manner like that. So, like when a game comes out that you really want to play, you sit there and you play the shit out of it for hours and hours and hours. And you've even said like certain games, you're like, oh, this isn't a great game, but you play it for like 30 hours. You know what I mean? So it's kind of the same thing. Like I can watch movies and be like, well, that was a movie. Like I didn't really like it, but I'll watch other stuff that I probably know I'm not gonna care for, because I like watching different things. So
yeah. Well, if there was gonna be a year for video games, this is gonna be the year. So I guess we'll just tie it all back to the very beginning and just say we've got a lot of interesting video game things happening, and by this time next week, maybe we'll know if something other happen, something bigger.
Right. Well, I did start playing Dead Space. I finally got the old 4K TV, so I did start playing the Dead Space remake, and holy shit, is it good.
It's so perfect.
The graphics are unbelievable. Like,
the game's...
Yeah, it's just an incredible game.
I think that game is perfect. And that's why I think it holds up so well, because I think it always was perfect. I played through that twice, actually.
I will say they did not update the battle system at all.
Don't want them
did
to.
not. I thought they would have. You know, like in Final Fantasy VII, like they made it more of like you can run around and hack and slash and kind of thing, whereas
it's not turn-based.
It was turn-based in its original. So they could have done something to update it, maybe make it a little less tanky.
I suppose maybe, but I'll say that I think that combat was fantastic anyway.
Well, like when you're punching,
gun.
right? Like you can basically keep an enemy down by punching, but sometimes if they're too close to the wall, they like bounce off the wall and end up a couple feet from you, and then you get hit because you're still punching and they're attacking you.
Oh, I'm never punching in that. I'm always shooting. I'm a shooting.
Dude,
by the
I'm
way,
only playing it on medium, and there's not a ton of ammo. Like,
no,
it's tough.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Whatever they do, the systems they have, so that it does drop ammo, it just keeps you barely hanging on.
Oh yeah, because in some areas they hit you with like 7, 8, maybe even up to like 10 of those necromorphs.
It's all procedural, which just makes it all the more impressive. Honestly,
it's such a good game.
It's so good. I just talking to you about it right now, I was like, I just want to go play Dead Space. All right, well, we've been going for a little bit, so I guess we'll probably just wrap up now.
Sounds
good. What do you think? All right.
See you,
Until
everybody.
next time, sir. Bye.